This video, scrolling through YouTube, I think, and I thought it was pretty interesting, so I thought we could watch it and then discuss. So this is Chris Hedges on the Bad Faith podcast YouTube show. I'm not sure when he was interviewed on there, but this clip from the show was reposted January or August 5th of this year, so sometime this year probably. And this is Hedges, why, in his opinion, the squad is quote-unquote useless. So let's take a listen and we'll discuss.
More than once. If you talk about the squad, how many people are you talking about? 5 people? They have no power. With the power of the Democratic Party, the reason Schumer and Pelosi have so much power is they're the funnels for the money that goes to the anointed candidates. And if you run afoul of them, you don't have any money, and your campaign, your ability to get reelected or elected is almost...
So, I mean, that's probably pretty accurate there, and one of the reasons that the squad, whether it be, AOC or Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib, have probably been more resistant to calling out Democratic leadership or Biden, because they know if they do that, if they try to speak truth to power and actually get some things done that would improve, the material conditions for the working class, then they would be ostracized. They would be cut off from all of these, funding mechanisms. And I think, that self-preservation, like, oh, I got into this position. Do I really want to get kicked out, or should I maybe just go along to get along? I mean, I think it's going to play a part, I would think.
In the case of Bernie Sanders, what was accepted, I was very critical of Bernie, by the way, on a couple points.
Yeah, he would always call him the sheepdog for the Democratic Party, right? I remember that.
I believe that the Democratic Party was ever going to allow him to have the nomination, and he should have broken out and started the third-party movement, even though he wouldn't have.
Imagine if he had done that in, 2016, how much momentum and progress we could have seen, because by having a strong, progressive, leftist, in air quotes, third party, the Democratic Party, in order to garner votes, would have to start making some concessions, you would think, right?
It's going to take longer than an election cycle for us to build a viable third party. And secondly, Sanders just wouldn't take on the military-industrial complex, which has to be dismantled if we are...
Well, and to have a inhabitable planet. Hedges is talking about the economic cost, but there's also a huge cost to the environment. The U.S. military is a bigger polluter than most countries.
to address the social inequality and the suffering that now afflicts tens of millions of Americans, probably at least half the country. I mean, let's go back and look at the Sanders campaign. You had Lloyd Blankfein, the former CEO of Goldman Sachs, making it very clear, along with other major Democratic Party donors, that if somehow Sanders got the nomination, they would vote for Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump was an embarrassment to the empire. They wanted to restore the kind of decorum and gravitas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like Joe Biden, puts a nice veneer on imperialism and white supremacy, a little bit more polished, put together. And, Trump was just this, wild buffoon, just saying whatever came to mind. And that, that doesn't paint a good picture of the U.S. empire. Joe Biden, it's a little more acceptable.
That an Obama had, or even a Bush had, and that Trump had destroyed, and that Biden would. But they could live with Trump. They could live with the Trump policies. And so I worry about the left. I mean, I think the left has to stand unequivocally with those people within the country who have been dispossessed and against the Democratic Party. Otherwise, especially among the white working class, we are going to see another Trump, if not Trump,
more effective
perhaps
one.
a competent Trump. I mean, we must remember that the elites, embodied by figures like Biden, Clinton, Bush, in both parties, the lies that the elites told to the American public about the consequences of NAFTA, of trade deals, of dismantling welfare, Glass-Steagall, austerity measures, deregulating Wall Street, these horrific crime bills, the endless wars in the Middle East, the bailing out of the big banks and Goldman Sachs.
All that same type of shit still going on, isn't it?
Rather than the victims of their fraud. These lies were far, far more damaging to the public than any of the lies told by Trump. And I think that what's happened is that the elites have been found out. There's a loss of credibility. And this isn't just within the United States. You see it because these policies are global. These global speculators have seized control, in essence, of not only the American economy, but most economies.
Capitalism is the virus. He's not explicitly naming it there, but we got to get rid of capitalism as well to have any hope for, life for the human species to continue on this planet.
And that's why Biden's a dangerous figure, because what Biden and those around him are attempting to do is recreate the ancien regime. To go back to this kind of utopian conservatism. And it isn't going to work. In 1932, in Germany, the traditional conservative class gathered around von Papen because they were terrified of the rise of the Nazis and tried the same thing, and it failed. And that is what is so frightening. I think the elites don't get that it's over. And you see their tremendous loss of credibility is a loss of political influence. That's right. So you see all these people outside the mainstream. Alex Jones. Of course, I detest Alex Jones. But figures like Joe Rogan or Matt Taibbi or Glenn Greenwald. These people who weren't groomed by the media conglomerates and who speak outside of that power circle. I mean, look at CNN, look at MSNBC, even Fox. They're just courtiers. I mean, they spin it from one angle or another, but they're like courtiers at Versailles. And meanwhile,
more or less just stenographers for the State Department, people, in the corporate media, the White House press corps. You're not going to, see them challenge Jen Psaki or Joe Biden or Anthony Blinken, calling out U.S. imperialism, U.S. war crimes, U.S. continuing to try to persecute and extradite Julian Assange for the crime of being a journalist. They're not going to have, an anti-capitalist critique. It's always going to be in this very, very narrow, spectrum of debate and questioning, that is allowed within this system.
The country, which is suffering, has been rendered invisible. This has been, of course, true for poor people of color for decades. But it's also true for the white working class, which I'm not defending the way that's often expressed. But that the suffering is real, and my family comes from working class towns in Maine that have been utterly destroyed. The mills are gone, and the town where my grandparents are from, the bank is boarded up, and there's methamphetamine clinics all over the place. This suffering is real, but unacknowledged by corporate media. And so we're entering a really dangerous moment, which is...
the corporate media doesn't really acknowledge any of the problems afflicting the working people, the most vulnerable, marginalized in the U.S. or, abroad, who are victims of U.S. imperialism, whether it's in Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, Syria, North Korea, etc. And it's always going to paint, a very rosy picture of the United States and, American exceptionalism and, all the bullshit that entails. And, they're not, again, never going to come with a accurate critique of the material conditions that are on the ground, that, tens of millions of people in the U.S. don't have health care. Tens of millions of people, if not more, struggle with hunger on a daily basis, including children. That the United States is has the world's largest prison population. We spend more on the military than the next 10 countries combined, yet we can't get universal health care. Like, millions of people are shackled with thousands or tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loan debt. I mean, all of these issues. And again, like all of these crises, largely created by capitalism, it's always the most vulnerable and marginalized people and groups that are impacted by them, the most. And then like fucking climate change, you never really get, like in the corporate media, like all these bad extreme weather events are happening, but usually more often than not from what I've seen, never actually connected back to climate change being the cause for them, and increasing in intensity, because that would hurt the fossil fuel companies or the military industrial complex. It's a yes.
Exacerbated by COVID. So I mean, if you look at just the figures that are out there, and this bill, of course, does nothing to address this. You have 50. This was last year before COVID. 50% of the households accounted for 1% of the nation's wealth, and the top 10%.
Couldn't be worse now. I mean, Jesus Christ, we have Bezos spending $5.5 billion for 4 minutes, kind of close to space, and yet we have just insane amounts of inequality across the board in the United States. And again, like, this shit's going to continuing to happen, and these levels of inequality and suffering and death are going to continue to get worse till we transition away from capitalism, which is a economic mode of production where profit reigns supreme. Profit's more important than giving people health care, education, housing, water, anything else. Profit reigns supreme. You got to get rid of that if we're going to adequately address any of these issues, that Hedges is talking about in this video.
76% of the wealth, which is, it's now worse. 18 million Americans depend to survive on unemployment benefits, and businesses are falling, small businesses are falling right and left. 81 million Americans can't meet their basic household expenses.
81 million Americans can't meet their basic household expenses. It's like 25%, 20% of the U.S. population or so.
Lack enough food on a daily basis. 11 million can't make their next house payment. These are the real kind of New Deal structural issues that, if we don't address, will bring a very frightening blowback.
Boom. So what do you think about Hedges' premise that the squad is useless? There's only a couple of them. They don't really have any actual power, and how they're kind of muzzled in a sense from speaking out, because they know if they do so, they would be cut off from these funding sources, through leadership, through people like Pelosi or, Chuck Schumer in the Senate, or if you call out, Biden by name and critique the Biden administration's absolute failure up until this point. What are we, almost 8 months into the Biden administration, and they've done fuck all for the working people, both here and and abroad, as a result of U.S. imperialism. So I mean, I largely would agree with Hedges on this point, that they are more or less useless. They just give people this, hope that somehow some type of transformative or positive change is going to come through the Democratic Party, when we've seen that electing more Democrats, even if they are so-called progressive or members of the squad, isn't really going to result in anything, because the Democratic Party is more or less bankrupt and corrupt to its core, and will always be, on the wrong side of these social movements. So I mean, I think Hedges is largely right about the squad. But that's just my take. I would love to hear yours about what Hedges said in this, in particular about his characterization of the squad being useless. Let me know down below what you think. Like the video if you like the damn video. Subscribe for more content. All part of the people. Peace. Much love.